We got, yeah. Yeah, Al, it's so nice. You made it. Especially when you make it. It's hard for you to make it tonight.
There. Didn't have to go anywhere in the snow. It was easy.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah, the driving was a lot of fun today. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Dorit and Shira. So this is very, this is just, I was thinking it, I was like, oh, wow, this is class number 150. That sounds like, feels like a big number. So it's not usually that we count our classes. So we don't, we don't usually have the,
How do we know it's 150? Sure has been counting.
Well, what I do is every time when I write notes, and I write notes before each class, I number it.
Oh,
So
that's
I'm like, okay, this is number 150. Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, you thought I was counting?
I don't know. I didn't know.
Are you kidding me?
I thought maybe you estimated.
Oh my God.
I thought maybe you were estimating. I don't know. I'm like, how'd you know?
No, this
Totally
is
not.
literally 150. With literally 150, which means we started the class like 3 years ago, and you miss a few weeks for the holidays, this and that. So,
Ms. Turn, I think we should do like an in-person one and just like discuss highlights and just kind of like get together once, just as like what do you think?
That's a very, very.
I'm in.
That's a very.
I'm in.
Anyone else?
I'm in for in person.
Okay.
As long as I can make it, I'm in.
Okay. Sure, you're gonna have to ask everyone their time slots, and then you're gonna have to figure out when everyone can.
No, we could try maybe this time, but just in person.
Oh, okay.
This time in person for me would be really hard because my kids are rarely in bed as they should be by this hour. And I'm still like, that's why I'm on mute and trying to like get them off.
Okay, we'll figure it out.
I'm on mute. It's fine. You can make a lot of noise. So yeah, I think it's a great idea. And I think maybe you could just say, what are your times, and see what best thing that works for the most people. It'd be so nice to just like recap 150 classes. Yeah. Okay, so we'll leave that to Shira's great organizational talents, and we'll continue with what we're discussing, which in theory, this is supposed to be the last class on this, but it might be or might not be. It depends what happens tonight. But we were so last time we were talking a lot about praise. We were talking about receiving praise. We were talking about giving praise. We were talking about the best ways to give praise. So continuing sort of along these ideas is that a talent of a woman, or the nature of a woman, it might not be considered our talent, is that very often when we look at things, we can see potential. We can see what this child could become, what this person should become. And that's a very, very feminine gift. It probably ties into that extra, as our sages call it, extra bina, extra understanding, extra sense, extra awareness. When we look at someone, we can have the sense of where they could go. Now, as a wife, that could be an incredibly positive thing or an incredibly negative thing. It depends how you use it. When of course, the most classical example of the positive of this is Rachel with Rabbi Akiva. All of Torah is to Rabbi Akiva, and all of Rabbi Akiva's Torah came from Rachel. Came from a girl who looked at him and saw his potential and knew how to pull the strings to get him to use his potential. So that is like the most beautiful example, most classical example, and most beautiful example of a woman's gift, of looking at someone and seeing their potential and gently coaxing them in the right direction. That's a power. Now, obviously, the negative version of the story is like this nagging shrew who's so frustrated with her husband for the same reason, because she sees what he should be, but he's not moving there. So instead of that Rachel touch, she just gets like all mad and upset and pressurizing, and a lot of tension and stress in the relationship because she sees the potential. So that's something that we can look at in ourselves and how we relate to our husbands, that we should see his potential. We should believe in his potential, and we should help him get there. And this goes back to this paradigm we keep structuring of the husband as the mashpia, as the one who gives, the wife as the recipient, that gracious recipient, and the gracious recipient eliciting the giver. So that's in the feminine way, as a recipient, eliciting our husbands to be who they can become.
Ms. Turin, is there a point where we should just accept this is his, like, this is how he's wired, this is how he is, and like, don't push because you're not gonna get anywhere? Or is it
Yes,
really our job?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Thank you.
So how do you
saying that.
know?
It's not.
That's a great question. Like, when do you know when to push and when, like, you're not supposed
It's
to
tough.
change people?
So
Right.
So what Dorit is saying, yes, and it's Shira's asking a very good question. It's not, we're not supposed to push. We're never supposed to push. And Dorit said, you're not supposed to go, or I'm saying what Dorit is saying is, you're not supposed to get into a marriage thinking, well, he'll be fine as long as I fix him in all these ways. No, yeah. Forbidden, taboo. You're not allowed to go into marriage thinking, hey, you're going to fix your husband, then he's going to be amazing. So that's why I'm saying it's a subtle point. And I'm glad Dorit and Shira said that, because otherwise what I'm saying can be misconstrued. You can't look at him and think how you are going to fix him. No, totally off of the whole relationship. But if you look and see his potential, you can think, how do I get him to believe in this potential? How do I give him maybe the courage to go for it, or the vision to try it, to step out of his box, to be something different than he's envisioning himself as? Just as, I mean, the best way to think of it is if you have a child. Because also in our children, we see their potential. And sometimes they can't see their potential. And we can believe in them in a way they can't believe in themselves. But we can't just tell the child, oh, just stop it. Stop acting like this. Go do this. I can't do that. Yes, you can. Go do it. That's not going to be the way that we're going to bring our child out of their boxes into what they could really be. So you're not, it's a very subtle point. You're not trying to change him. That's the nagging shrew. You're saying, like, let's do a very simple example to try to make it a little more concrete so you understand what I'm saying. Let's say you look at him and you think, wow, in anything, if he was self-employed, he'd be flying. He's so stuck in this job where nobody appreciates him. Or conversely, wow, I think he'd do really well within a good structure and hierarchy. And right now he's just working for himself, so he doesn't have the same structure, and he's not effectively using his talents because it's, he gets a job, he doesn't get a job. So it could be anything. That's what I'm saying. That's why I brought two converse examples, but sometimes what it is. You look at him and see what he could become, and then you think, okay, how can I share this with him? How could I share with him this vision of himself so he could believe in it and walk in that direction? Oh, I think he'd be wonderful working with children, but he would never volunteer to be the dad that whatever does the sports leagues with the kids, or is he, he just, I don't know how to handle kids. No, you're so wonderful at it. Well, how do I get him to see that? So it's not to change him. It's not to fix him. It's when you see what he has to try to get him to believe that. So Shira said, when are you just supposed to sort of accept what he is? So when you're sort of supposed to accept what he is if that's what he is. That, which is not at all what I'm saying here. In other words, if you say, well, it drives me crazy that he's always late, I'm such an on-time person, or it drives me crazy he's so on time, I'm such a late person. That's what we're talking about. That's not potential and him believing in his potential. That's just character traits that drive you crazy. And as Shira said, yes, in a healthy relationship, you accept. You just accept. And I think for myself, and this isn't only in marriage, I think of this actually more often not in marriage, but in other situations where if someone who's doing something that's, I don't know, it's called annoying or bothering me or wrong, and I think, okay, they're just like me. I have an evil inclination and they have one too. I listen to mine, they listen to theirs. We happen to have different temptations. but we're both doing the same thing. So that sort of like eases that like annoyance and frustration. When I think, oh, me and you, we're doing the same thing, just different things. So similarly, if like someone has a character trait that drives you crazy, you think, oh, he's flawed. Thank God, me too. You know, if he was perfect, it would be very stressful to live with a perfect person. Thank God I don't have that challenge. He's flawed. I'm flawed. Remind yourself of your own flaws, and it's easier to accept his flaws. So that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about changing his flaws. I'm not talking about should you try to change his flaws. I'm talking about not flaws. I'm talking about potential. What he could be if he believed in himself. You know, you envision him and you see his ability to be a leader, to help others, to give, to do more. But he doesn't do any of those things. He doesn't even think of himself that way. How do you get him to do that? Has anyone done that with their husbands or with someone else? It doesn't have to be with your husband. It's not only a husband thing. I'm saying I think it's just as equally a children's thing. Seen potential and successfully conveyed it to him or to them or to anyone?
I mean, I never saw anything like he'd have to do it and then I'd recognize it. It wouldn't be like, oh, I see this greatness in you and let me try to pull it out of you. No. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I see what you could be if you allowed yourself to fly, if you allowed yourself to dare, if you allowed yourself to try. I see what you could be. Anyone can think of a time they've done that with their children, with somebody else in their life, that they saw a talent they had, but the person wasn't using it, and they helped them become it.
I think it's easier with children for me than my husband, where you could see a child's potential, like, oh, you're so creative, or you're so this, why don't you try that? Why don't you try this? But I feel like with my husband, it's like, you're talking to an adult. Like, I don't need to tell him, or maybe not, I don't need to tell him, but like, it's not well received when I'm like, oh, maybe you should try this. He's like, why are you telling me what to do?
Right. So there comes, right. So there comes that feminine gift with a lot of prayers and charity before of how to say it, how to give that vision without the other person feeling like you're telling me what to do. That's what you're supposed to do with our children. And that's, of course, it is much, much easier to guide a child because they're your children and that's sort of your job, which both of you know. And that's not, you're saying your job in a marriage, but it is a gift that you can have in a marriage. And again, you would have to first, like she was saying, how do I know? So you'd have to first have the sense of what, like, you know, say catch them when they're good. Maybe you maybe like, for example, again, just making a scenario, maybe if you like an example when always he's the quiet one at the meal and you're the one talking and engaging the guests. And like, I don't know, one week you were just drained and done and didn't. And he did a really nice job. Oh, wow. That's a whole piece of him that like just emerged that neither of you knew about. How do you get him to keep accessing it? How do you get him to believe in himself that way? But I'm saying, I think it's a part of our gift that we do see potential in people. We can envision what they will be. I think that's part of a woman's talents to like look at things and see what it can become. And that is, I agree with Dorit. It's not simple to share this with a husband, but it is possible. It is really something we can do. Something else, going back to this whole idea of like communicating with a husband, going back to what we were talking about earlier about that the husband's job, his mitzvah, is to give you pleasure. And like, again, how do you communicate that? And it goes back to sort of like, well, you're supposed to figure out to say something that it can be heard, that the other person can hear what you're saying, that the other person can receive it, not as a criticism, not as a like, you're no good, I want you to change, but rather as this is something you could do. This is something you could do that would be a meaningful, like in this situation, a meaningful gift for me. And it's sort of, I think in these situations, especially like here, we're talking about something you want your husband to do for you, it's really important, and this relates back to also how to help him grow to become the person he can be, is to say something. But this is very important, and this is not so easy for many of us. Say without expectations. Whenever you're trying to communicate something like this to anyone else, it's not only to your husband. Of course, to your husband, it's more frequent perhaps, because there's a lot of things we might need from our husband. We want to be able to state what we need, but at the same time, we don't want to have any expectations, because expectations equal control. We're not trying to control the other person. When you have that vision of him, of what he could be, if he believed in himself, you're not trying to control him, you're not trying to fix him, you're trying to help him become what he can become. And similarly, if you know that this is something you want from your husband, you're also not trying to fix him and change him and have expectations, control over him. If you would say, you know, I like it when you do this, this is what makes me happy. A lot of times we sort of all fall into this trap of thinking that love and marriage sort of endows your spouse with prophetic spirit, with Ruach HaKodesh. And like, it's for most spouses not true. If your husband has Ruach HaKodesh, that's awesome and appreciate it. But for the rest of the world, they don't. Which means, and sometimes we have to really ask ourselves this, how should he know if I never told him? Because very often we get frustrated with our husbands for things we never told them to do, but they should know. He should know. He should if he had Ruach HaKodesh, but he doesn't have Ruach HaKodesh, so he doesn't know.
But shouldn't he know after like the 100th time of being told? Or is that just a gut?
It depends.
Thanks,
It
Shara. I was just
depends.
going to say the same thing. Like, how many times do you have to go through it?
Right. Like, do men just, are they just wired in a way where they don't get it? It just takes them a lot longer to process things?
There's a saying in Hebrew, you can either explain fast and they understand slowly, or you can explain slowly and they understand fast.
Okay, great. So Dorit just gave you a tip. No, I think some things you could sort of think, if you said it very clearly, that they should get it. And then I think you have to ask yourself, so why isn't he getting it? If I 3 times, 5 times, 10 times in a very nice way, without expectations, stated my expectations, but without expectations, and he's still not getting it, that means he's resisting, right? Something he didn't hear it. He wasn't like in the other room and you shouted it or said it and maybe he didn't hear you. You had eye contact. It was a face-to-face conversation. You said it very nicely. He understood it. So why is he still resisting? And that's something you always have to ask going into what we want to talk about, which is a flaw that drives you crazy. You have to like get under the surface, like to understand what's the root. Like if he leaves his dirty laundry on the floor of your bedroom, why is he doing that? So if you're telling him so clearly, this is something you really need and it would really make you happy, and he still doesn't do it, you have to ask yourself why. I think that women often fall in the other camp of not saying and then being very disappointed and hurt. Like it's a big birthday coming up in your life, a nice round number, or for some reason significant to you. And then he doesn't buy you anything or anything different than he buys you every birthday, like, flowers or something, which maybe doesn't mean so much to you. It's nice, but he doesn't every birthday. This is a special birthday. But how is he supposed to know it was a special birthday? What do you mean? Of course he's supposed to know. It's my 30th, it's my 40th, obviously it's a special birthday. Maybe if you're a woman, think about it. But if you're a man and don't, then how is he supposed to know? I was very impressed with a friend of mine. It was her 50th birthday. And she asked her husband to buy her a very nice gift in honor of her 50th birthday. And I was like, that's a really special wife to do that. Instead of just waiting, and he should know, and he should also know what I want, and he should get what I want. And then in the end, he doesn't know, he doesn't get what you want. And you're like so frustrated and upset with him. And it was just like smooth over the whole thing to clearly, without expecting he has to do this, but to clearly like put out there what you want, what you need, what would make you happy. Now, again, maybe nobody in this group is thinking like that, and maybe many of you are very comfortable with asking your husband what you want from him. But not everyone is. Somebody here would say, yes, not my problem. I'm very comfortable asking what I want from my husband. You could raise your virtual hand.
I just buy my own jewelry. I don't wait for him to do it because he'll never do it. If I want something, I go and I buy it for myself.
And that's great. And that's great. And or not, because somebody else would say, I don't want to buy my own jewelry. I want him to buy it, but I want him to know on his own to buy it. And I want him to know what I like on his own, because we have this whole like fantasy. We don't think of it as Ruach HaKodesh. We think of it like the relationship. Like, obviously, you know me, so you know I want it, you know what I want, you know how I want it, and you do it. And then when he doesn't live up to all those fantasies, to all those stories we tell ourselves, because he's real life, not the story, and then we get upset and we even get hurt. So Yael is saying, hey, I have a perfect solution. I have his credit card. It's a gift every time I swipe it. Or another person is saying, solution, say what you want. Without like demanding it, without like, I must have it, but just like putting it out there. So if he was wondering what to, it's just like, my husband said to me last year, my children chipped in and got my husband a very nice present for his birthday. So I guess because they did it last year, when my husband's birthday came up this year, he said to me, oh, if the kids want to get me a gift, this is what I'd like. And I think my daughter, she said like, that's sort of like rude. And I said, no, it's not rude at all. It's great. Because it's always the hardest thing figuring out what to buy someone. So I conveyed the message to my children who were so happy. Because of course they would want to buy him a gift. But what to buy for him? How are they supposed to know? So it's sometimes something like that, in your heart of hearts, if someone asks, you know what to say, but you're never going to say, they should know. And then they don't. And then we're disappointed. So sometimes it's fine just doing it yourself. And sometimes it's fine because you want him to buy it, telling him what you'd like him to buy. And then if he doesn't, he didn't. And that's fine. And we move on. And we don't get stuck, but we're giving him the opportunity, if he would want to give us what we're looking for, to know what we're looking for. And I'm saying this is true in every aspect of our relationship, in every aspect of what we want from our husband. It's everything we do is all building or destroying. So it's not like, well, in the morning when you're rushed and stressed and short with him, but that's got nothing to do with like what he's supposed to be like when he comes home from work. Well, of course it has to do with what he's like when he comes home from work. Every interaction creates every other interaction, including when you're stressed, including when you're tired, including when you're in a bad mood, including when you've got many other things on your plate and you're not thinking about him. all of these interactions are impacting what he feels from you. And very often, going back to what we were discussing, I think 2 weeks ago, about the feminine and masculine space, the same idea of this, he's being the mashpia, you're being the makabel. It very often we are in this masculine space. I mean, it's just part of our world, and we have to get things done, and we're being efficient, and we're very like masculine thinking. Very often, many things we do. It's not always natural for us, or might not be natural for us at all, to be in this, what I'm calling like feminine space, this makabel, this recipient space. And when you can, it really shifts the emotional dynamics of what's going on. Like very often, just like I don't know, it's like, 20 minutes before Shabbos, and he walks in, and then he's like, what's going on? And why are you like, where are you going to be done in time? And you're like thinking, well, that was really nice of you to walk in 20 minutes before Shabbos and then say that, like, where have you been for the past 2 hours? Or maybe roll up your sleeves and start working, and then maybe it'll be possible. It still won't be probably possible. Or any of those other types of responses. All of those are like, he's being masculine and you're being masculine, and yeah, it doesn't end well usually. And it's a big shift to say, let me put myself in a feminine space, in a makabel space, which is sort of like, what would that mean practically? It was sort of like, okay, you're hearing what he's saying, you're being gracious, you're receiving it, you're taking it, and then you're like, okay, like, oh, that's so good, you pointed that out, you're so right, and let me see what I could do to sort of make this work, because you're right, the way I'm doing it is probably not going to come out too well. Which isn't our knee-jerk reaction, of course. But it's the makabel, it's the feminine version of like absorbing, taking in, nurturing, gracious, dignity, refinement. All those words that unfortunately are words our society doesn't really naturally lead us toward. But it's such a way to dispel negativity. In other words, a masculine space, like the God's divine energies above, are linear, cause and effect. That's a very masculine modality, very rational modality. And the feminine, which is, as we discussed, that final 10th divine energy of sovereignty, is just taking it in, receiving it, absorbing it, embracing it. That's why it says a man's supposed to search for his soulmate. The woman isn't supposed to go looking. She's supposed to attract her husband, meaning he's supposed to find her. That's his job. She's supposed to be able to sense he's the right one and convey the message. So it's a very, unfortunately, in our world, it's a headspace most of us don't actually have, because we're conditioned the other direction. We're conditioned generally to be very masculine thinking. So it's a big paradigm shift to say, but not in my marriage. But in my marriage, I'm supposed to be feminine. And we are. And we have to like keep realigning ourselves with what would feminine look like here. And when we can get into the what would feminine look like, it like shifts everything else. It like makes everything else work. Because that's really how God wants us to work. That's really how God wants to do. Like if someone, when I have 2 sons married and a few more children that should be getting married, God willing. So when you do research, it's very rare for someone to say about a girl, oh, she's a really good makabel. Like, who would say that, right? Who even thinks along those lines? But every once in a while you do hear it, and then you've got gold. Go for it. That's gold. of course, all this feeds into, of course, we're talking about the idea of intimacy. And intimacy is, again, very much, it works the best when he's in the position of feeling like he's the man, feeling like he must be in the relationship. And when you're in the position of feeling very feminine in the relationship. In the Torah, the word for intimacy is knowing. Goes back to Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, and Adam knew Chava. And when a man is intimate with his wife, he's knowing her. He's experiencing her, he's feeling close to her. Now, generally by a woman, the intimacy is the result of feeling close. The desire for intimacy is a result of feeling close. It's an expression of her love for her husband. But by a man, it's in the other direction. When he's with his wife and he knows her, then as a result of that, he feels emotionally close to her. So when we're looking at our husbands and we're saying we see their potential, we have that extra bina, that extra understanding, that extra intuition. When we spoke last week about praise, and our verbal praise helps him actualize himself. This especially happens in intimacy. That's really where you're really conveying your vision of your husband. Not, which perhaps is very different than the messages the rest of the world sends him. Now, hopefully we can think of ways to verbalize the message, but intimacy is a very strong way also to give a message. So Dorit said before that when she has this vision for her husband and she tells it to him and he's like, what are you telling me this for? Like, what are you telling me what to do? But in intimacy, when you're manifesting what you feel for him, that's conveying a very strong message. And if, of course, you're in the space of, I'm tired, not so interested, get this over with, I have other things in my mind. Well, he knows it and he feels it, and that's the vision he's getting. That's what you're conveying. And if he feels, I'm so happy to be with my husband's so special to me, he feels that. He feels that. And it really builds him up. And maybe makes him look at himself different than he was before. There's like
Wait, could it ever be where the woman has more manly, what's the word? Like, could it be opposite where like some women have more manly traits and vice versa? Or it always Hashem created that way where like the man
it could be, but for the marriage, it's really important for that woman to find that feminine part of her. Of course it is. And I'm saying especially nowadays, but it always was, but especially nowadays, because we're all in a society that's conditioning all of us to be men. We all grew up in that society. That's the message society gives all of us. So many of us have very natural and enhanced by society masculine strengths and masculine outlook. But in our core, we're a woman, so we're feminine. We're just not so in touch with that core because society doesn't promote it. I mean, society's used to it, but nowadays they don't promote it. But for a marriage, that's always the best place to be. In marriage, the best way to make the marriage work best is for the woman to be in that feminine space. And again, combining nature and nurture, it can be very difficult. And it can feel very unnatural and like, no, I'm not like that. I don't want to be like that. Actually, you are like that. That is how you're wired. Every single woman is like that in her core. But because of everything we've absorbed, we've like traveled far from that core sometimes. And we don't realize what we really want and what's really best for us. But if you can, so we have to work to become natural. We have to work to find out what we really are. But when you can get in that space, it's the best thing for any marriage. And every marriage works best. Every marriage works best when there's that sense of the woman is feminine and the husband and the man is masculine. It's each one really being true to themselves. And for each one is sort of like unusual space to be, or especially in the relationship with each other, it just means, of course, because the work goes back on us, we have to work harder to make that happen. A lot of it is like our frequency. A lot of times, and this is something else that society has really conditioned us, that our frequency is what's in it for me. And very often, we consciously or without realizing, look at life through that filter. What's in it for me? What's in it for me in this relationship? What's in it for me in this friendship? What's in it for me in this job? I mean, this is so sad. This is someone I know, a couple that got divorced. As secular, but a couple that was married for many years. And they got divorced just because, I don't know, she was like tired of her husband. Like, he didn't have a great job. He wasn't earning a lot of money. She didn't feel she needed him in her life. The kids were already older, so she didn't need him as like a babysitter sometimes. And she just like, that's it. She just wanted, and they got divorced. And it was like, there was such, you mean they weren't even fighting? Like there wasn't even friction. It's just like, what do I need you for? It sort of goes back to this, like, so we've been so sometimes again, what's in it for me? And stepping out of that frequency, stepping out of that space and thinking, what can I do to help the other person? What can I do? Like we're saying, seeing someone's potential, what can I do to build him up? What can I do to help him achieve what marriage is supposed to accomplish? Marriage, the word for marriage in Hebrew is nisu'in. Nisu'in is from the root word to elevate, to lift the other person up. And that's what's supposed to be happening in this mitzvah of marriage. Marriage is a mitzvah. And every mitzvah, we sort of know the generic blessing we make is Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu, whatever. When we get married in the mitzvah of marriage, the man says to the woman, Harei at mikudeshes li. Asher Kiddishanu, Harei at mikudeshes. Marriage is the mitzvah of kiddushin. Now, every mitzvah achieves that kiddushin between us and God, us and Hashem. That's the idea. Kiddushin means separate. So through every mitzvah, we become a little separate from the world and we become one with God. So, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav, you made me kadosh, you made me one with you and separate from the rest of the world. That's what's happening in marriage. Harei mikudeshes li. You're designated. You're separate. We're one, separate from the rest of the world. It's just the two of us, right? Through the mitzvah, you're separate from the world. It's just me and God. Through marriage, we're separate from the rest of the world. It's just the two of us together. By Mashiach, that's going to be the overt reality of everything. It's all us and God as one. And now we work toward it. We work toward it toward God. And we also work toward it with our husbands. And a lot of times this is helped by just, I guess to use a term we use nowadays, unconditional love. Doing for him. Not because what I'm gaining out of it. Because this is my gift to him. We spoke before, Elle was saying about being tired. And I said, take naps. And it's like, why bother? As a gift, as an expression of love. It's a perspective. Viktor Frankl, his famous work, Man's Search for Meaning. So Viktor Frankl lived through the Holocaust. And in the concentration camps, he was observing how different people reacted to the Holocaust, to the concentration camps, to what they were going through. And he, with his, training, with his psychological training, which of course he achieved before the Holocaust, he could look at people and sort of have a sense. Obviously, God runs the world, and obviously there's exceptions, but just as a human being, sort of predicting who's going to survive or not. Meaning, what did he mean who was going to survive or not? They were all going through the same thing. They were all going through an inhuman experience. They were all going through an experience that none of them were supposed to survive. And that anyone's survival was a series of miracles. It wasn't a miracle. One miracle wouldn't have made it. For every single person who survived the concentration camp, it was many, 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 many miracles. And if anyone's read any memoirs of anyone who went through that, you see many, 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 many things that only all of them created survival. Now, what did he mean who would survive? His point was, it's not what you're going through. What you're going through is inhuman. But how you interpret what you're going through, how you react to what you're going through, that on the human level is the difference between surviving and not. So he brings up very, very, very strongly in his work and in his whole, the whole branch of psychology he developed, this idea of, it's not what happens. Life can be hard for all of us. Life can be challenging. But how we interpret what we go through, how we react to what we go through, that's what's going to be the difference between a happy, centered, optimistic person and an unhappy person who doesn't really enjoy their life, who doesn't feel very good in their life. And this very much relates to how we process flaws. When we see a flaw in someone else, it could just get us upset, it could drive us crazy, or we could interpret it a different way. And then we have an opportunity to be a very happy person with a very happy life who happens to have a human husband, which means he has flaws. There's a number of different things you can do to try to process your husband's flaws, interpret your husband's flaws in a way that builds your relationship and doesn't do the opposite. A really great tip that really works very well in hard flaws and hard situations, but also in the more minor ones, is when you're seeing the flaw in him, understand this could be God's plot to make me aware of it in myself. Because my self-love, hopefully we all have self-love, that's part of being human and healthy. So my self-love really covers over those little things inside of me. I don't really see them so clearly. I can't really acknowledge my own weaknesses because I don't notice them. But when you look at the other person, you don't have any blinders on. You see them very clearly. So if you notice a flaw and you just notice it dispassionately, okay, it's his flaw, and yeah, I'm human too. Doesn't bother me. But if you notice a flaw and it drives you crazy and you're really, really, really upset by it, this could be that situation. And you have to ask yourself, why is this bothering me? If I'm aware dispassionately, it's information. It's a fact. But if I'm passionately upset about it, it's probably because it's my issue as well. Can you identify a flaw? It doesn't have to be your husband. I mean, this isn't only true for a husband. This is true for everyone in your life. If you're a husband, if you're a flaw in anyone else in your life that really upsets you, and if you're thinking about it, you actually realize you have the same flaw. Anyone can raise their virtual hand if they can think of someone in their life that does something that drives them crazy, really upsets them. And if they think about it and they try to process it, like I'm saying now, like right now, try to process it. Look at that flaw. Can you see that you have it as well?
I can attest to definitely seeing my own flaws in my kids, and then I get so upset, like, no, don't do that. And then I'm like, I'm telling them not to do that because I'm always fighting myself on don't do that or do that or.
Exactly. That's why it bothers you so much. That's why you react so strongly to it. In other words, if it wasn't your flaw, it's more like it's a fact, and we deal with facts. Because it's your flaw, you have so much emotion tied into it.
Exactly.
And that's why you react the way you do. So you're saying you already see that. Anyone else can think about it and like really recognize, maybe they didn't realize before that not all flaws. I'm not saying every flaw of everyone you see is your flaw. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying the flaws that drive you crazy, that really upset you, are much more likely that they're upsetting you because it's your flaw. So Dorit says she sees it with her children. Anyone else see it? It could be with your husband, it could be with your children, it could be with anyone else in your world. Just something that someone does that really upsets you. And if you think about it, you realize you have the same thing, maybe not in the same way, maybe not manifested exactly the same, but in its core, you have that. Okay, Dina, raise your hand. I can raise my hand. I definitely see this in my life. Anyone else can realize that things that bother you in some other people, maybe they're bothering you. Okay, we got Yudi's also. Because
I see it in my mother, but I don't know what it is exactly. That I'm like, I can't like think of it right now. But I'm like, sometimes I get frustrated with my mother with something, and then I'm like, wait, like I do the same thing.
very often. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna take
Totally.
that example for a second, because very often the most common truth is with parents and children. So Dorit was saying it as a mother seeing her children, and Judith is saying it as the child seeing her parents. That is the key places where we always see this, because we're their product and our kids are our products. So and yes, as adults, you can definitely see it with mother or father, that like that piece of them drives me crazy. And then like you see you treating your children the same way they treat you, that drives you crazy, or doing the same thing that drives you crazy. You do the same thing with your kids. It's scary sometimes. Or as Dorit is saying, seeing in her children all the stuff she doesn't like in herself and she sees in her kids. So sometimes you're really aware, this is what I don't like in me. And sometimes you weren't aware of it because the window dressing is different. But if you think about it, it's the same issue. Like if you would never like the way your parent always was very controlling. And then like you think about it, you realize, wait, I'm a very controlling person. Or you see your kid not being honest. You're like, why is it bothering so much? And you can sort of say, well, maybe I'm dishonest. I mean, I never thought of it that way because my dishonesties are not, but then I'm like, maybe that's not true. Maybe it's really the same trait. It just by the kid, it manifests itself like this. By me, it manifests itself like this. But because it's my issue, that's really what's bothering me. So what's the gain? So getting back to your husbands, what's the gain in recognizing this? Again, I'm not saying every flaw of your husband, you're not, he's not your parent or your child. So it's not that every flaw of his is one of your flaws. I'm saying, but the ones that drive you crazy, I think are. What's the gain if you see this? If you can find it? And again, it might take more than the 5 minutes of a class. It's something maybe when it happens, you might remember, or or you can think about it. You're really upset that he does this. And then you think about it and you're like, wait, me too. Actually, I do that also. That's probably why I'm so bothered. I think the first thing is tolerance. When you realize it's also your issue, you can have tolerance and compassion for him with his issue. Someone just sent me a long, I sent to everyone, a long chat. It's to everyone. Okay. That's very nice. So Viva just wrote that that actually it's a good wake-up call to realize this, which is true. And actually that's part of that's sort of why God wires us this way. In other words, looking at it the other way. When I'm upset because of the flaw, and then I think through it and say, why am I upset? It's a fact. What's to be upset about? Oh, because it's really my flaw. This is actually the most direct way to recognize your flaws. I mean, it doesn't sound very direct, but again, understand it from God's perspective. You've got too much self-love to see your flaws. There's no way you can honestly recognize your problems. So when God sets up the situation that you're triggered by the other person because they have your flaw, if you're going to be honest and think about it, this is actually a direct road to understand yourself. And that's the point. So that was so nice what Viva wrote, because she's saying, oh, it's a wake-up call. And it really is. That's really the point of it. So when I'm looking at flaws and I'm saying, wait, these flaws really bother me. Do I have that? Am I like that? And it might take 5 minutes to realize it. And it might like come to you in 3 hours suddenly, like, oh my gosh, I really am. Because you so don't look at yourself that way. You don't view what you're doing the way you view what he's doing. Because it's very different. It is very different. But underneath it all, it actually will be a lot more similar than you realize. And then it's like, oh, so why am I getting upset? I'm getting upset because because we share the same problem. And if you think of it like that, well, why should we be so upset at him? It's because I also have this problem. I should actually be more tolerant and forgiving because I have this problem. And I actually now have an opportunity to work on my problem. And that's where you want to get to. That when you see his flaw and it drives you crazy, and then you realize it's really your flaw, and then you step up to the plate and start working on your flaw and take responsibility for your flaw, it just right away, it diffuses the whole emotional piece. I'm not saying he's changing, but you're not going to be upset with him about it. You can identify it, but not emote it. If it's not yours, you identify and not emote it naturally. If it's yours, you emote it until you identify that it's actually yours as well. And then that shifts the dynamics.
Is there a way to figure out how you're manifesting it, how it's manifesting in you? Like something that bothers you about him, but you're not sure how to see it in yourself?
Sometimes the only way, if you can't find it in yourself, is to speak to an honest, good friend. Honest, because like a lot of, especially women are, oh no, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. They don't think it, but that's what they say. So as someone who's savvy and honest, and to say to them, I really want to know. And I think what she was saying is a very good point, because again, that goes back to our own self-love. It is sometimes, so your husband has this flaw. clearly drives you crazy. So you know you must have it inside yourself. And you really don't see it. You really don't see it. Nowhere. Don't see it at all. You sometimes really need someone else's set of eyes. An outside set of eyes is so, and it's not because the other person is smarter than you. It's just because they're not you. So they can like see things, some things in you that you can't. But again, we have to understand it's not, might not be to the same intensity, duration, degree. Maybe I mentioned like, let's say dishonesty. So, you know, you see your child start shoplifting. Well, you would never shoplift and you never shoplifted your whole life. But then you're thinking, this is bothering so much. Where do I have dishonesty in myself? And you find it. And it's a very, very, very subtle version of the story. It's true. It could look very different in you than in the other person. But it's still the same flaw. And that's why sometimes it's hard for us to see it in ourselves because it doesn't look the same way. Not only does it look the same way because I'm looking at myself, so I only see perfection. It also doesn't look the same because it is different. It's a much more subtle manifestation of the issue. But it's still the same issue. And healing it in ourselves is the best way, definitely, to resolve this relationship issue. And also actually to help him heal it as well. So on a practical note, if you, I do want to, I really wanted to finish it. I'm trying to move a little quickly, but I don't think we're going to. So okay, I'll just stop here. On a practical note, that's good. Let's end with something practical. Okay, so this is a practical homework assignment. If your husband has no flaws that upset you, you don't have to do the assignment. Well, you could do it with someone else in your life. If someone has a flaw that upsets you. If no one has any flaw that upsets you, you are off the hook. Free pass. But for those of you that have a flaw that upsets you with your husband, I'd like you to try to do this. I'd like you to first try to think, do I really have this in myself? Because the first knee-jerk reaction is, of course not. I don't behave like that at all. So do I have this in myself? So after you say no a few times, say, wait, I probably have this in myself. Let me try to find it. If you can't find it, as I just said to Shira, talk to someone that knows you well, is savvy and honest. The problem isn't usually savvy. The problem is usually honest. People don't want to hurt you. So you have to like tell them, I want to hear this. I'm looking for this. Help me find it. Like take away all their fears of hurting you. And then usually another person, if you can't find it yourself, will help you actually find it in yourself. Again, it could be in a very, very refined version of the story. At that point, you're not doing your homework. I'd like you to try to make a game plan how to change. You can say, change, this isn't my biggest problem. I've got many other problems. True, but it's a problem because you have it and he has it, and therefore it upsets you every time you see him doing it. So for that reason, it sort of became a bigger issue inside of you to work on. And commit to trying to change yourself. And then two things should happen. I don't know if it's all going to happen in a week, but two things should happen. One, and this would be cool to see, as you change yourself, is he changing? Because ultimately he should, for two reasons. One, just in a very natural way, as you know, you never realized you had that flaw, but he did. So when he sees you working on yourself, like, just a simple example. Let's say he always sort of makes these biting comments that you find so offensive, and he seems so critical. And then you realize that you do it too in your way. Different than him, of course, in a smaller way. Whatever, you do it too a little. and you really committed to change, and you really started changing how you don't say those comments anymore. You never thought you said them. He is noticing. He is seeing that you're working on yourself and you're changing. And that's like a very big, like, green light to someone else. When, especially someone that lives with you and knows you very well. So, you know, it's like Shira said last week, like when your spouse praises you, it's valuable because they know your flaws and they're still appreciating you. So your husband probably knows your flaws more than anyone else in the world. So when he knows your flaws, then maybe he doesn't know all your flaws, but he probably knows your flaws more than anyone else in the world. So he knows your flaws. When he sees you're working on yourself and you actually are changing, that's just a very big impetus for him to work on himself as well. It's just like, oh, wow. People can really change. She's really changing. She's been like this for 20 years and she's really changing. And a lot of times it comes back to me too. You know, I also want to. Just like you think in a very simple sense of like one person goes on the diet and starts losing weight and the other person feels like she's losing weight and I'm just eating away. Like, that doesn't feel right. That's on the very physical way. It also, there's a lot of spiritual power happening as well. Because when you want to correct someone else from their flaw, a very strong way to do it is to work on yourself in that area. And give God the message that what I'm doing should help the other person in their weakness. Like if you would see your child and they're dishonest, and you commit to being more honest, that, and you're telling God, I'm doing this to help them, God like sort of transfers that energy, so it gives them that spiritual help to overcome their issue. You see your child not controlling their temper. You see your child being disrespectful, and you take on yourself to be more respectful, to more control yourself, and tell God, this is for him, for her. Spiritually, what you're doing, that work actually helps the other person change. It's a very powerful tool. It really works. So therefore, to recap, you're going to think about, does my husband have any flaws that upset me? If you don't find any, look for somebody else in the world. But if he does, pick one, look for it in yourself. If you don't find it, ask an honest, savvy friend to help you find it. Tell them, I really want to find this. Please help me find it. Find it. And then create a game plan to change. And commit to change, even if you would say, no, I have other things I got to work on first, but you're committing to change because this is not what you're fearing in your relationship with your husband. And as you're committing to change, there's two things I want you to look for. One, what's happening to him as a result? Is he changing also? Which should happen for the two reasons I explained, on the physical plane and on the spiritual plane. And also, until he perfectly changes, when he still does the same thing, does it bother you the same way? Is he changing as you change? And if he's still falling in this area, does it bother you the same way? So it's a little bit of a long-winded assignment, but it's a really powerful tool, and it can really make a big difference in people's marriages. All right, so we're just going to very briefly say a thought from the Parsha. This is your Dvar Torah to impress your children and inspire them to also share their Torah thoughts. In Parsha's Teruma, we go through the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. Very, very detailed, very, thank God today we have beautiful diagrams and charts and pictures, otherwise it's very hard for us to understand. But picking just a very simple idea from the Parsha, we speak about the construction of the Ark of the Arom, on which on top there were these keruvim. So keruvim are usually translated like cherubs, and you think of like maybe cute little children. They were huge, they were massive. These two figures with these huge wings. And it says that these figures were actually expressing the relationship between God and the Jewish people. To the degree that they could be totally somehow, without mechanical machinery inside, be back to back, or be face to face, or actually be in an embrace. And it says that when the temple was burning, when the temple was destroyed, and the Romans went in to the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest would go on Yom Kippur, and they saw the ark, and they saw on top of it the Kruvim, and they saw they were in a most intimate embrace, to such a degree that these very immoral Romans were like, what? This is what the Jews have in their temple? This is their Holy of Holies? This intimacy? But our question was more like, what? This is what's going on? This is such an expression of the intense love? The temple's burning. And the sages explained, yes. God, with his absolute love for us, destroyed the temple instead of, God forbid, destroying the Jewish people. And that's a thought probably some of you have heard before. But just to imply it a little bit, when we think about it, if we would decontextualize that concept, here we have destruction, harsh stuff, a burning temple, and the Kruvim saying, God is feeling such love for you right now. And that's why he's doing this. And it's a very powerful thought in our own lives, because everything that happens is from God. And generally, we should assume that God has a lot of love for us. And sometimes we see the smiles, we feel the hugs, we feel the warmth, we feel the kindness, and we feel how much God loves us. And sometimes it doesn't feel like that. Sometimes what we're going through doesn't seem like warmth and love and kindness and hugs. And then it's good to remember the Kruvim and to understand that even if on the surface we see a temple burning, we see judgment and harshness and destruction, it's coming from God's enormous love. Everything we go through is another expression of God's hug. Sometimes it's a hug we feel, and sometimes it's a hug we have to understand. This too is God, so this too is his hug to me. And when we could look at our life that way, it's so much easier, again, to feel content, grateful, and happy in every situation in your life. Thank you so much for joining. I hope everyone has a great time doing their homework and can share with us their tremendous success. Thank you for being at class number 150. We were very excited to realize that's such a special number. And thank you for everyone that's been with us for a lot of these classes, 3 years worth or more. And, you know, so it's so beautiful, just the process. And thank you for being part of it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Mrs. Turin, and
Thank you,
Yasher
Mrs.
Koff to
Torrin.
you.
Thank you so much.